So just an example. I know to many this might sound like science fiction, but self-driving cars are actually starting to become a reality. You know, Google has worked with General Motors to develop the world's first self-driving car, and Nevada, the state of Nevada, has passed laws in the US to allow driverless cars on its highways. Now, it's not that all of a sudden we're going to move from the kind of cars we have today to completely driverless cars with no people in them. Bit by bit, more functionality will be built into the cars that you drive that do things like control the distance that your car is from the car in front of it, that do things like prevent your car from going over the speed limit, that do things like prevent your car from going through a red light, that give you a kind of overdrive facility that can allow you to sit and work on your PC while your car controls itself. So a kind of cruise control, but in built-up areas. So this is actually starting to happen bit by bit. Over time, insurance companies will insist on this. Insurance companies may determine your premiums on the amount of this automation that is built into your car. Governments might eventually start legislating around it, saying cars are not allowed on the road if they don't have this type of functionality built in. This is starting to happen. It won't be long, we expect, before people say, isn't it amazing that only 10 or 20 years ago, cars were driven by people alone with no automated overdrive facilities to prevent accidents, to stop people from going through red lights and so forth? And a lot of this has been legislated for. So for example, in Europe, e-call facilities are already been built into new cars, which means that if there's an accident, instantly a message goes out to the emergency authorities so they can get there fast. But what are the implications of this? What are the security implications of this? So these need to be considered. Again, we have IP technology sitting in these cars that are increasingly automated. What are the security implications? And this is just one example of where technology is taking us in terms of converging with industries and transforming the way different types of industries actually operate. So just to my kind of earlier point that I'd like to emphasize, virtual world security issues are starting to massively impact the physical world. So if we go back to the 80s or 90s, when we had viruses and so on, it might bring down an IT system, and sure, it would be a massive inconvenience. It might slow down certain types of activities. But today, the effect can be very profound just from very simple security breaches. I mean, for example, somebody hacked into the Associated Press Twitter account. I'm sure many of you here are familiar with this particular incident, and sent out a tweet saying that there were 2 explosions in the White House and Barack Obama is injured, which had an instant impact on stock markets. So that very simple security breach had an enormous impact on the physical world. And this is just a simple, rather uncomplicated one. So South Korea, for example, the big issue there that they're paranoid about is the nuclear security plants. Because the North Koreans have got teams of people constantly looking at ways they can target attacks on very specific facilities in that country. So it's massively impacting the physical world and the kind of security, not just around technology, that the South Koreans, for example, need to look at. So how are threats evolving over time? Well, I think one of the most important things to say is that the potential impact of these threats is much more profound than ever before. So back in the day, in the mid-late 80s, early 90s, PC viruses and spam were the primary issues. And sure, they caused problems, but the impact was nothing like what it is potentially today, and we're starting to see today. Then we moved to internet viruses, DDoS attacks, which could bring down commercial sites, government sites, and so on. Worms, Trojans, phishing bots, and so on. Today we're seeing a move towards, I guess, some things that have been around for a while, but we're seeing a lot more, for example, of maladvertising going on as advertising becomes a bigger way for certain social media organizations, for example, to generate revenues. legally getting onto a site with an advertisement with malware in it is becoming a more and more attractive approach. Admittedly, it's been around for a while, but it's something we're starting to see a lot more of today. Ransomware as well. So sites flashing up with an FBI warning saying that you have illegal content in your machine, pay $200 and we'll clear it up for you, or you just can't get into your machine, is again something that's becoming commonplace. And organizations that are doing this are making millions of dollars from it. I mean, a lot of people see it coming and find a way around it, but still plenty of people will shell out that $200, and sometimes it doesn't get them out of the situation they found themselves in. Social media and mobile cloud APTs, so-called watering holes, are becoming more and more attractive approaches. So just touching a little bit on social media, you know, we're seeing a lot of, in social media, I'm sure you've seen it yourself, a lot of people that use Twitter get direct messages coming to them saying things like, look at what people have been saying about you, click on this. And that gives an opportunity to offload an unattractive payload onto your particular device that you're using. So similarly, you know, we're seeing more and more so-called watering holes tied in with targeted attacks. So watering holes are typically, you know, sites with vulnerabilities that are used as a way of pouncing or offloading your toxic payload onto people passing through, so-called drive-bys. I love the analogies. But they're becoming more and more, it's compromising not such secure websites typically. But we're seeing a move towards increasingly targeted attacks, where customized malware has been developed with a view to attacking specific organizations or individuals. And over time, information about those organizations and individuals is collected and then offloaded using a crafted vehicle, let's say, to do that. But this very focused way of doing things is becoming more common. You know, an organization could, for example, get information about any individual in this room, and they could find out from perhaps your social media profiles, they could find out a little bit about what school you went to, they could find some connections, they could arrange to send an email from an old school friend, for example, that might say something like, we found this photograph of you, you know, from when you were 10 years old, click here to see it, for example. And a lot of people might fall for that. Those are the kinds of targeted attacks that we're increasingly seeing on individuals. But we're moving to a situation where people are talking about cyber everything in the security world. Cyber terrorism, cyber espionage, for example, are things that we're increasingly talking about, which reflects the increasing impact of security breaches on the physical world. So just to get down to some of the specifics, what I'm trying to do here, I won't dwell on this slide for too long, but really what I want to highlight is the fact that the highest growth that we're seeing in security is around mobile, so mobile security and virtualization security. So these are the big growth areas in the security markets today, which reflect the way organizations are starting to move, which is towards more highly virtualized environments or cloud-oriented environments, and increasingly using mobile devices to access resources. Social media, which I talked about a little bit, is now becoming a key part of the customer experience. Perhaps more dangerously from a security perspective, it's becoming a more key part of the enterprise experience. So companies are increasingly starting to use social media as a way of engaging with their customers, both from a B2B perspective and a B2C perspective. So we're seeing this increasing move in that direction, which is making social media a very attractive platform for malware. Because again, there's always a lag in the security industry and catching up to these new platforms. Or actually, perhaps I shouldn't say in the security industry. From a buyer perspective, there's always a lag in being aware of it. Usually within the security industry, the firms that provide the security software are fully aware of these threats, but it usually takes some time for the organizations and the individuals that are threatened to respond accordingly.